Thank you for listening to this episode.
And follow the podcast on social media by finding @PrestigiouSPod. And if you'd like to be coached on how to live a more prestigious life, you can reach out to me, Chris Bean, @ChrisBeanOfficial, or by emailing the podcast directly at prestigiousinitiative@gmail.com.
Lastly, sign up for our newsletter either through social media or on our website.
This is the Prestigious Initiative. Welcome. I'm Chris Bean. Today, I have a guest who brings a unique perspective to the podcast, Peter Sorgenfrei, the founder, CEO, coach, and advocate for the whole human approach. Peter, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Peter, can you tell me a little bit about you and what brought you with us today?
So I founded and built 6 companies in the last 20 years. And for the last 4 years, I've been focusing on helping founders and CEOs build their businesses as their coach and advisor.
Okay. Wow. Wonderful. So Peter, your journey of building companies across the US, UK, and Denmark is remarkable. Can you share some key lessons or challenges that you faced through this journey that led you to prioritize the well-being of CEOs and founders?
Well, the short story is that building these businesses actually got me to a point where I couldn't work, where I ended up getting sick, having a stress-induced incapacitation. So essentially, I was flatlined, lying down, couldn't get out of bed one morning. And I was afraid that I had a brain tumor because I've gotten to an age where that is a possibility. And so out of that came a lot of self-reflection and work on saying, well, what led me to this point? What is it that has caused this? And out of that came the whole human approach, which is now something I work with founders on. But if you ask me, what are some of the key learnings? I think learning number one is take care of yourself first, right? I think we as business owners are really good at taking care of the business first, and then maybe our friends and family or our family first if we have it. And then we come, third or fourth. So lesson number one for me is to put yourself first at all times. That's not egotistical. That's actually necessary.
And I can imagine as the business owner, that's quite the challenge to do.
It is, because you feel guilty towards your investors or towards your team or towards your customers. And there's always something to do in the business, right? It never ends in terms of things that you have to do internally or externally. So prioritizing your own time and prioritizing your own mental health and physical health is something that a lot of founders struggle with.
And I also can imagine that there's probably at least initially some pushback because the business owners think that if they do that, then it's like they're letting go. They're letting go in the reins and letting somebody else take control. I can see how beneficial that can be and how important that is. But how do you help the business owners to navigate that challenge?
Well, you're absolutely right. Initially, when things are going well and you're managing well, you're like, well, I don't need to take more time off. I'm fine. Things are working, right? And so you're basically plowing towards the abyss or towards the edge. And unfortunately, more and more people meet that abyss or meet that edge. So the first thing I do is I just start talking to them about what their life is like. Are you sleeping well at night? Are you, doing the hobbies and the habits that you used to do, like exercise or seeing your friends or spending time with your loved ones? And once we start having that conversation, many people realize that a lot of things that are important to them and that make them feel good in their life, they're no longer doing. And then we start talking about why is that? Well, it's because I always have all these things to do in the business. And then we start working on, okay, well, do you actually have to do all these things in the business? Or can we change our priorities in the business and only do certain things so you free up space for yourself? So it starts with a realization that my life is not what I want it to be. Then thinking about what can I actually do day to day to change that? And then getting back to having the life that you had before you got into this situation.
And I got to say, I love that concept of asking those business owners those questions that get them to understand the holes and where they're at because of the way the questions are asked to them. That is a key important way to do that, because then you're not kind of pointing the finger and blame gaming. You're allowing them to ask the question or answer the question, and through the answer of the question, they understand. Okay, yep, there's a hole, and then you get to share with them the approach of how to fulfill that better.
You're right, and it starts with awareness, right? Most of us don't realize it as we're building companies that we're the frog in the pot and the water is starting to boil, right? It's just starting to feel a little lukewarm. But so just being aware, saying, am I actually doing the things that I enjoy? And in some cases, people are like, yeah, I do my exercise, I sleep well at night, I'm good with my relationships at home, but there's still something missing and they can't quite pinpoint it. And then that could be some other issues that we then can work on. But in most cases, people are like, you know what, you're right. I'm actually not leading the life that I want to, and please help me do something about it.
Yeah. Now, Peter, you mentioned becoming a personal advisor to CEOs and founders, providing independent support without an agenda. How crucial do you think having a personal advisor is for individuals in leadership roles, and how does it contribute to the overall well-being of that person?
Well, when you think of it, any founder CEO probably has a partner at home that has opinions about stuff, but that comes with a lens of love, care, respect, but also that they're their partner. They have an investor, they can have a board, they can have a co-founder. Everybody around them has a lens through which they view the issue and respond to them. What I've found is my clients see me as completely independent because I don't really care about anything but them. The only thing I care about is that they have the life that they want to have in the best way possible. And so even though they pay me to provide this service, I don't worry about whether or not they're going to be clients for a long time or a short time. I have a fixed process that they have to go through with me. And what happens after that is entirely up to them. So a lot of them experience me being quite frank and direct with them in a way that others haven't been. And I think that's why I have impact, because they actually take my advice for what it is, namely a mission to get them to a better place. So I think it's crucial. I started this because I didn't have that. So I've built all these companies, I've had all these employees, I've had wonderful experiences, but I never had somebody to talk to who understood where I was and could give me advice and listen to what was going on in my life without me thinking in the back of my head, well, they're only saying it because they have this lens.
And I can imagine being in a business or being the business owner, every time somebody's giving you feedback, it's through some sort of a lens. And maybe it's for better or for worse, but very little do like we don't have people in our inner circles really that are there to tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. They're there, they're going to tell you what you want to hear. And I think that often if you can find that person, whether it's a company that you're paying to do this, or you have that one person that just, no matter what, just tells you whatever it is because that's how that person is. If you can find those people in your life and put them inside of that circle, that does wonders, because then there's no lens, there's no biased opinion. They're just telling you whatever it is. And I mean, if it messes with your relationship, then so be it. But that's what you need to hear in that time.
And I think that's a really good point. The challenge my clients tell me is that some of them have worked with a psychologist, for example, right? Or some of them have worked with a business coach of some sort, but they have not found somebody yet who actually has been in the situation of, holy moly, we're running out of money in a month. What do I do? Or I'm struggling with my relationship at home because I'm so invested in my business. How do I get back to being the partner that I want to be? And because I've had those experiences, my experiences are not transferable to my clients. But because I've had that breadth of had investors, not had investors, had board members, not had board members, gone through divorce, had successful relationships, I have a different perspective on this situation. So yes, you can find somebody who is super independent in giving your perspective, but you still want somebody who actually knows what it's like to be in your shoes. It's kind of like, I can't tell a carpenter what to do because I've never been a carpenter, right? But I can still have an independent opinion. Whether or not he or she uses it is a different matter.
And I think that That is a key aspect of that, because if you're just giving feedback and there's no rhyme or reason to it, there's no understanding of where that other person is, then it can be perceived as probably more harmful or crucial than it should otherwise be. So having somebody that has been in those positions, been through the tough times and the good times, and been in the business, you're giving them advice from that standpoint. That is super helpful, because then you know what it's like to be them, and they understand that, so they will take that information much more, willingly than otherwise.
And oftentimes some of the stuff I tell them is quite tactical and rudimentary around hiring strategy, for example, or processes in their business. And that's when I really lean into my own experience. But most of the time, it's actually not business challenges we're working with. Most of the time, it's personal challenges. And my person is, of course, different from your person. So in that case, I don't project what I would do in the situation. I go through the same kind of questions that we did in the beginning here. I start asking about, well, how is it that you would like to relate to your wife? What is it that matters to you in that relationship? How can you go about showing her that, for example? And so people find the answers themselves. And this is not a big secret. What I do is not magic. I essentially just get people to trust the answers that they already have within them. But it's teasing them out and then holding them accountable to the things that they want to do. That's what an effective coach does, and that's what I do on a day-to-day basis.
And I think that accountability piece, that is, I mean, not that everything else isn't important, but I think that accountability piece is so important, because then it's not that you're just allowing them to find these answers and then giving them an opportunity to hear, at the very least, what the right steps are, but then you're holding them accountable to do the things that they said they're going to do. And it's wonderful to say these wonderful things, but to follow through on them and then be held accountable to them on the other side, man, that makes all the difference.
Yeah, so I'm on WhatsApp or text messages with most of my clients and ask them, hey, did you do the thing that we agreed that you were going to do? And in all cases, it's yes. Part of this is also, they're paying me to help them. So it's kind of like going to the doctor and not following the doctor's advice, right? Or if you have an attorney in some instance and they're giving you advice and you're paying good money for it, and then you go ahead and do something else, then you're not going to get the effects of what you're paying for. So, I think the accountability matters, but I also think the kind of relationship we have matters. They take me seriously and I take them seriously, and that's why we end up getting results.
Now, let's dive a little bit more into the whole human approach. Can you elaborate on how this approach harmonizes professional aspirations with mental and physical health, as well as nurturing professional relationship? And then, what inspired you to adopt this kind of way of operating the business?
So basically, I thought again about my own experience, and I wanted to sort of give up with the notion that there is a work life and a personal life. It's an integrated life, right? There's no work-life balance. It's work-life integration. And so the way I started thinking about it is, in order for us to be good with others, we have to be good with ourselves, right? We have to understand ourselves. We have to be in a place where we are essentially in balance, or where we're good. So I typically draw like a diamond, where in the top you have your personal life, and in the bottom you have your professional life. And to the left you have tactics, and to the right you have strategies. So anything I do with my clients is to say, okay, when you go to work, when you're in the office or in front of your computer, if you're working from somewhere else, the person you are there is the same person who has to deal with a sick child at home, or a challenging relationship, or whatever it might be. And similarly, when you're at home and you're a parent, you're still the person who's responsible for investment or investors' money or other things like that. So you don't make decisions in a vacuum. You don't live your life in a vacuum. So by integrating the lens of personal, professional, and then talking about what can you actually do, what are some tactics, some real things you can do, and what are some strategies, essentially, where is it that you want to go, what path is it that you want to be on. That's how I get around the whole human. and make sure that people are a whole human, whether they're at home or at work, and not just one or the other.
Well, okay, so I got to say, I totally agree with you on the work-life balance side, because work-life balance seems to be like the catchphrase, the thing that everybody is talking about nowadays. But really, like you said, you are the same person at home as you are at work. The way you navigate things, the way your brain, you're the same person. So the idea that you have to keep your work life completely separate than your home life, you can't do that, because you are the same person. You are the connective thread that runs through all of that. And I mean, if you, just in case anybody listening didn't already know this, you are the connective thread that runs through your entire life. You are in all those places because it's your life, and everybody has their own life. And so the work-life balance isn't something that, and I wish I knew where that phrasing came from, or why that came about, but that's a catchphrase that people, I think it really has people out of whack about how to interact with their work and home experiences. And they really think that they have to be two different people or keep them completely separate from each other. But it doesn't work that way.
The simplest example I give is you're sitting in the office, you're at work, you're at your workplace, and the phone rings and it's your mom. Do you pick it up? Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, right? Or you get a text message from a friend who says, hey, do you want to come watch the ball game on Tuesday? You are doing things at work that has to do with the person or the personal life. Similarly, and this is where the chain falls off. This is what a lot of people have a difficulty managing, is when they're at home, they check their email from work stuff, right? Or if somebody calls, they may pick it up even though they're making dinner with their family. So I think the work-life balance came around because people wanted to separate the things, saying, I'm going to work from 9 to 5, and then I have to be in balance, so I have to spend time being at home. But because of technology and because of our varied interests, that doesn't exist anymore. So when I talk about work-life integration, and I also use work-life balance on occasion, but it's more about being present where you are. So I can be present with you now doing this recording of this podcast, while at the same time I'm at my home, and in a minute my son is going to walk through the door, right? And so when he walks through the door and you and I are done for today, I'm going to switch and go to be with him and make dinner with him and put him to bed. And then maybe later I'm going to switch back to writing something for my blog or doing something else that has to do with my work. But as long as I'm cognizant of that switch and saying, I'm now here, fully present with you doing this, and then later I will be fully present with him doing that. Where the chain falls off, and then I'll finish this long thing, but it's when we try and think we can be both at the same time. I can't be a good parent if I'm looking at my phone worrying about my work emails at the same time. And I also cannot be a good CEO if I'm constantly dealing with my mom asking about whether or not we're coming home for Christmas, right? So we have to be cognizant of what we're doing when we're doing it, but we can certainly be both in both places.
Absolutely. Yeah, and wonderfully put. I totally agree with all of that. You mentioned giving your clients homework for behavior change. I guess my question is, how do these assignments contribute to the coaching process, and what type of behavior changes through this homework are most impactful for those CEOs or founders?
Well, it's a long list because it's very individualized, right? There's not a blanket slate of saying, if you do this, everything will be great. But I can tell you what I often get people to do. I often get them to spend time by themselves, for themselves, every single day. So I literally just finished a call with a client today. I said, you need to take 30 minutes every single day where it's just you, no phone, you and silence essentially. Because that little room is a space that will allow you to handle the demands of your work and the demands. He has a young family, 3 small children. A lot of stuff happens in that household, but he never gets time for himself. So that's a piece of homework. And so what now happens is we've agreed that every single day at 8 o'clock in the evening until 8:30, he is not looking at his phone. He's not working. He's not talking to his spouse. He's by himself in a section of his house where he can be alone. And I will follow up on that. And I do this because I know that he needs that break in the day. Another piece of homework, which is another favorite of mine, is leave the phone in the car. So when people struggle with being on when they're at home, which a lot of us do, again, back to emails and all sorts of things happening on that device, the homework is you're now for the next week, whenever you come to your house, you're going to leave your phone in the car. And if you don't have a car and if you live in an apartment, you're going to leave the phone in a place in the house where it's not accessible or not easily accessible. And you're going to do that for a week. And so every morning, I will follow up with them saying, did you leave the phone in the car last night? And what happens is in the beginning, people have separation anxiety because we look at the phone, like 70 plus times a day, I think, on average, right, as humans. In the beginning, there's separation anxiety. But after 2 or 3 days, they're forgetting that they left the phone behind. And they're starting to see that they're much more present where they are. So that's a behavior change that comes from a forced piece of homework, like you asked.
All right. I'm going to talk about the first one first, the 30 minutes sitting alone. So in our brain, we have background processes that are going kind of all the time, right? And if we don't necessarily know the answer to whatever it is right now, we're working on whatever it is, I'm not actively thinking about that thing, but my brain is still, trying to figure out, connecting the dots in the background. Does that 30-minute of reprieve, of not focusing on any one thing, but just kind of sitting quietly, does that help with that background processing, or at the very least to clear the brain cache so that you can reset as you move forward?
It's incredibly difficult to sit in silence for 30 minutes. I don't know if you've tried it, but if somebody forces you to do it in the beginning, you'll have all these thoughts and all these to-dos and all these things going on. But the brain is a wonderful muscle and tool, because little by little, that will fade away. And you'll go from anxious and annoyed to becoming more present with where you are. You'll look, I'm looking up above my screen now. I have some paintings there made by my son, right? So I'll notice things in those paintings that I would never have noticed if I hadn't forced myself to sit for 30 minutes. So all that chatter, all that activity dies down, and you start becoming aware of where you are. And that's the whole point, is to give the brain some rest and get you grounded to the space that you're in.
And you mentioned going to a specific place in the home or wherever you are to do this. Does that then kind of trigger a response that when you're in that space, that is kind of set aside for quiet time, for lack of a better phrasing? And I know, not everybody's house is huge. You can't do that all the time, but maybe you sit in one chair facing a certain direction, and that's where you do this activity at.
I actually most of the time encourage people to do it outside. And the reason I encourage people to do it outside is there are so many things to observe outside that makes you wonder. You can look at I record meditations. This is an exercise to get you started on meditation, which is one of the things I'm a big believer in. But if you're sitting outside on a bench and looking at a tree, there are a million things you can observe about that tree if you go through the motions of doing that. So I prefer people being outside, but I live in Denmark. It's cold and rainy most of the time for the next 6 months. So being in the house, the reason I suggest a specific place is, yes, association. When I go here, I do this thing. But actually, it's more simple than that. It's try to be in a place where you do not get disturbed. So if you live in an apartment or in a house that's not big enough for you to have a separate area for that, try and do it sitting somewhere outside. I have one client, he goes to a bus stop. He's not getting on the bus, but he's sitting at the bus stop because it's under the cover, and he's just sitting there for 30 minutes. And funny thing about bus stops is people sit there and nobody cares about whether you get on the bus or not. Nobody stands there and observes you. So it doesn't feel weird to sit there for 30 minutes.
Yes, right. Yeah, wonderful. Now, leaving the phone in the car. That is such a wonderful idea. So I guess about 4 years ago now, I shifted from Android phones to Apple phone, just so that I could get the Apple Watch, so that I could leave my phone at home and not have to have it with me. And now, frequently, probably 4 days out of five, of the work week, my phone just stays at home, because I
Mhm.
find that I can do all of my, immediate important text messaging or whatever it is just on my watch, boop, boop, and I'm done. And I don't have to have that device. And most of the time, you pick up this phone and your intention is to do the one thing, but then but before you know it, 45 minutes have passed. You're like, oh man, I've missed all this stuff. It's a sucks all the time out of whatever it is that you're doing. So not having that phone with you, specifically when you're at home, because that's where it's important to make those memories with your family, whether you have a huge family or a small family, or even if it's just you. If you can have that separation and have that in the car and not in your house, then that helps to separate that anxiety, sort of, or that continual thinking of whatever it is that's going on, because you're bombarded with text messages and emails and app notifications, all these things. That kind of helps to quiet all of that. And now, understanding that meditation is a key thing for you, that opens the door to allow that as a possibility then.
Absolutely agree. And I just want to, one comment about notifications, right? Even if, and some people do this, you shut off all your notifications, your phone is on flight mode, all this other stuff. The allure of what happens behind the screen is so big that you will still pick it up
Mm-hmm.
and still end up going on Instagram or TikTok or Snapchat, whatever your thing is. So the only method I found being effective is removing yourself from the phone. And again, it takes a couple of days. It'll feel uncomfortable, but then you'll be like, it's wonderful. I don't want to have my phone with you, similar to what you're doing.
Yes. Now, your coaching approach, it can be described as rigorous, serious, and intense. Can you
Mhm.
walk us through some of the elements of your approach? We already talked about homework, but I know you have tasks. You have radical transparency, constructive candor. How do these contribute to the development of your clients?
So I think if you've had any kind of coaching experience in the past, I didn't design this because I wanted to be different than everybody else. This is just the way I am, and that's why it comes across as intense compared to the other experiences. But yes, I ask a lot of questions, but I also ask people to do things in return, right? So as we've talked about, I give them homework. I require them to work with me for a minimum of 3 months. I require them to work with me every single week for an hour at the same day at the same time. So it's not like, oh, I can't do it on Tuesday. That's not going to fly. If you're committing to this process, this is what we're doing. I am radical candor in the sense that I will tell them when I think they're wrong. So compared to a traditional therapist or coach, I don't really lean back and kind of listen and say, why do you think that is all the time? Sometimes I will say, well, you're wrong. And here's why you're wrong. And this is what you're going to do differently. And you have to trust me. If you want to change, you're going to do what I ask you to do. And so people respond to that. Again, because I've earned their trust in our initial process, because they've seen what I do works. So far, I've worked with 37 or so over the last 3 years since I started doing this. And everybody's been excited at the end. But in the beginning, they feel like they've gone back to school. They feel like they've gotten a new headmaster who's taking them through the motions. But that's just how I am. I mean, that's how I led in the past. I'm kind, I'm respectful, but I'm also pretty determined on having an impact. And it is kind of like my way of the highway. But that's what they buy into.
Now, I'm guessing, because it's obviously you've built this strategically and on purpose and added all these elements in because you have been in those business owners' shoes before. Are you a very, I'm going to guess that you're very organized and systematic in your approach to probably how you do many things. Um, if I can kind of extrapolate out a little bit of what the business looks like.
Yeah, I think in some areas of my life, I certainly am. And then there are other areas in my life, like most people, where things are a little more messy and I'm not so good at because either I don't really want to do it, and so I kind of excuse myself from it, or it's something that I don't feel super comfortable doing and I don't know how to do, and therefore I try to avoid it, right? Um, so I am very structured. I'm very much a creature of habit as well, right? I have a very set routine for how my days go. I have very specific quote unquote requirements about how my life is in general. Um, and that's something that I think is valuable for the kind of role that the founder CEO has to deal with when you're dealing with all this stuff happening around you. Structure helps, but I don't prescribe people to be like me. I just suggest that this is a way that they can better manage the craziness around them.
Mm.
And yes, that's how I am and have always been.
And I can imagine that from time to time you interact with the CEO, and maybe not because you attract the type of person that you want to attract, and I get that, but I can imagine there's from time to time you have experience with CEOs or founders that are not as organized as they could be. And sometimes just getting those things kind of in line helps a lot of other things fall in line. Can you agree to that? Is that?
No, absolutely. I think most founder CEOs are have elements of popcorn brains, right? There's a million ideas, a million minutes, and they want to do all these different things. And so what I help them do, so a good example is recently a female CEO came to me and was completely overwhelmed. And one of the things that had happened was she had like 87 or 89 things on her to-do list, but it wasn't organized, meaning there was no deadlines on stuff. There was no priority. There was a mix of personal and professional and all sorts of things. So a simple exercise with her was to say, now, this is one of the tactical things, right? We looked at the list. I said, by our next meeting, so in a week, I want to see 30 items on that list. The 57 of the rest of 59 either has to be eliminated or delegated, or you have to argue in front of me why they should stay on the list. She was like, that's impossible. It's all important. I'm like, it's not impossible. Do it or I'll do it for you. And so what we ended up doing is she gave me the list. We did it, both of us. And I literally went through with a red pen saying, you don't need to be doing this. This should be done by somebody else. This is blah, 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 so on and so forth. And just by doing that exercise, she got from a point of, I can't handle all the things I need to do, to, oh, if I'm just a little bit more structured on how I decide on what gets on this list, it's much easier for me to manage the day to day. And by getting that in line, worrying about my calendar, worrying about my email communications, worrying about my physical communications becomes much easier because I can do the same thing there. So to your point, sometimes it's a little bit of structure in one area of your life that then spills into the rest of your life.
Now, have you heard the idea of the visionary, right? So it seems like oftentimes the person who is the founder of the business or the CEO is the visionary. They are kind of the ones that are steering the ship in all kinds of different directions. But from time to time, they get stuck in with the day-to-day. And because they are not very good about passing the reins to somebody else and allowing them to take control of the ship for just a little bit here. So you scrub the decks and I'll steer the ship. And that relationship gets skewed. And so they break away from being the visionary because they have to do all the other things. It seems like,
I think
well, I was going to say, it seems like your approach combats that super well because you're allowing that CEO, that visionary, to be in that role that they are in, the visionary, to steer the ship and where they want to go, but also allowing them the opportunity to give some information, some tasks, some processes to delegate to their other managers, to other people that are working for them, so that they can continue that visionary role.
I think there's a few things to unpack there. There is you're going from a visionary, inventive, founder, CEO, a couple of people, and then all of a sudden you're growing and you have a more complex business, and now you're a manager or a leader of a business. And so many founder CEOs kind of break their neck doing that. For one reason is they've never learned how to be a manager of an organism, right? They don't know what that means. I can teach them that. A lot of other people can also teach them that. But at the same time, they do another thing, which is they hold on to a bunch of stuff. So letting go of ideas and execution and perfectionism and all sorts of other things that a lot of these type A founder CEOs have is another thing they have to learn, right? So back to my initial conversation is you need to be good with yourself. You need to know yourself and manage yourself. And so a founder CEO needs to say, okay, yes, I'm the visionary. I know where we need to go, but I don't need to tell everybody exactly how we're going there. And by the way, there might be other people who are better at getting the ship to go in that direction. So maybe I should delegate some of this responsibility and find that person. Here's the rub, though. It is very difficult for many founder CEOs to find that number 2 or number 3 person and have them do that because they don't necessarily have the best radar to find an owner-operator versus finding another popcorn brain visionary person. So that's one issue. The other issue is oftentimes companies are not started by just one person. So you have a couple of co-founders and naturally say, okay, well, you, Chris, you're CEO, you, Peter, you're COO, you, Bob or Susan, you're CTO, whatever it is. But who says I'm the best COO? And who says the next person is the best CTO? So figuring out we have the right team for now and for the next period. At some point, we have to change the team. Maybe I'm not the best CEO. Maybe I should just be head of product because that's really where I'm passionate and I'm really good at it. And we'll get somebody else to be CEO. If you look at the most famous tech companies, there's only a few where the founder CEO has actually been able to take the company from the garage to several thousand people. You can Mark Zuckerberg is one, right? You can look at Larry and Sergey at Google in the beginning, but then they handed over the reins to Eric and to others. Microsoft, Bill Gates was there for a long time, obviously, but then Steve Ballmer and now Satya. So there is, for most companies, a natural transition from visionary founder CEO to founder who does something else and other people run the company. Making that transition is very difficult for most people and something that takes maturity and time.
Yeah. Well, I guess I hadn't thought about it like that. Having so many people, you're right, because there's not always that one person is the starting of the business. It's sometimes it's a collaborative effort. There's a couple people, and you may have all the right people in that team, but if you don't put them in the right roles, then it pretty quickly will kind of fizzle out.
And then there's ego, right? If you're the co-founder of some company and you're the CTO, and then your friend who's the CEO and maybe a board member says, you know what, Peter, we really need a different CTO now, somebody who's better than you. Am I just going to roll over and say, that's great, guys, you're absolutely right? That's really difficult for most people to do.
Yeah. Well, I can imagine so. Now, Peter, as a coach, you've helped CEOs and founders manage ups and downs. How do you guide individuals through challenging times, and what tools or strategies have you found to be effective in navigating the emotional roller coaster, really, that is entrepreneurship?
I'm going to go back to some of the stuff that we've talked a little bit about. To manage the emotional roller coaster of entrepreneurship, I know I've said a lot, but you need to be good with yourself, right? You need to be in a place where you feel good about where you are and who you are. So the tools that I use is time by yourself and meditation. That's a big one. It's in some circles it's seen as a little bit of hippie-ish, but it helps. It gets you to be calm. It gets you to be more reflective rather than reactive. And it can help you navigate those things. The second thing I do is I try to get people to block out the noise. So instead of focusing on what our competitors are doing, instead of focusing on who raised what kind of round of investment funding, instead of focusing on whether or not I got this prize or that prize or I was speaking on this stage, focus on what it is that we want to be doing with our company. Are we building the right things in the right order with the right team for the right customers? Those are really the only four questions you need to be asking yourself. And so coming back to that, are we essentially fulfilling the mission that we have set out to reach this vision that I had or we had? If you're doing that, you're doing great. Nothing else matters. But it's super easy to get caught up in everything that's happening around you and investors saying you need to run faster and customers need to say you need to build this feature and your partner says you need to be more at home and all these other things. So it needs to come back to sitting in your space with yourself. Are we doing these four things? Am I happy with where I am and what I am in the world? If the answer is yes to all of those, nothing else matters. So that's essentially what I try to get people to go through.
And I'm gonna put this into a different phrasing for me, and you can correct me if you don't agree, and that's totally fine. But really, it is taking the individual away from looking for outside sources for answers and turning them to the inside. So they're not trying to find answers from what other people are doing. They're not trying to seek answers about whatever else from other people, from outside sources, but rather they're sitting quietly, they're meditating, they're looking, they're reflecting in on themselves so they can answer those questions or find their truth or their mission or passion or the next steps, whatever it may be, but not from outside sources, because that's not them. That's not going to pull them in the direction that they want to go or who they are, but the inside, because then that brings themselves, their whole human, into whatever it is that they have next.
You're right. I mean, we most of the time we know what to do, right? Most of the time in your life, you know what to do. So the question you have to ask yourself is, why am I not doing this thing?
Yes.
Why is it that I am not delivering this to the team? Why is it that I'm not delivering this at home? What is it that's keeping me from doing that? Is it real? Is there a real constraint? Or is it a perceived constraint that I've put up for myself?
Yes. Now, Peter, with your international experience, what unique insights do you bring to the discussion of leadership, team building, and strategic planning? How you've worked across multiple diverse cultural contexts. How does that help to, structure your coaching approach?
I think the benefit of having built companies in the UK and the United States and in Denmark is I can very simply say to most people I meet, have you considered the perspective of somebody in this place, right? Do you understand what it means to be a business owner in Belgium, for example? No, I actually don't know what that means. Okay, so let's have a conversation about that. Because I have seen firsthand with my companies that having colleagues from all over the world in my businesses in New York caused a cultural difference in the workplace that we needed to manage, navigate. Some of it was great, some of it was really difficult. And so, back to the female CEO that I talked about earlier, she has employees from all over the world who are now working together in Europe, in an office in Europe. And so for me, having had that experience, I could relate to some of the cultural challenges that arose in that office that she needed to deal with. So I think that helps. But the world is very interconnected today. Most of us have traveled internationally. Most of us have had experiences on different continents, either for vacation or study or work or whatever. So I think a lot of people can relate to that. But it's a different story when you're building a business, because all of a sudden you're with people all the time. You have to understand what it means to, manage a tech team in Asia or sell to farmers in Texas. That is something not a lot of people have tried.
Well, yeah, and I can imagine that there's obviously a certain sort of figuring out as you go But if you can have somebody on your team or a close advisor that has been there and done those things, then that can certainly help, because then you can, hey, how do I interact with this, and how do I do the I'm sure you get questions like that all the time. Then that is your feedback on that for those people that are in those instances is incredibly valuable, because you've been there and done those things. You talked about it's not that it's some outside person that just has these ideas, but you have been there and done these things. And so when you give those answers, when you give that feedback to them, it is more impactful because you understand what it's like to be in their shoes.
I certainly think I know how to ask the questions that are relevant. I may not have had that exact experience that they're going through, but because I've had something similar, I can say, well, are you sure it's a good idea to outsource this thing to India, for example? Here are some of the things that you might want to consider before you make that decision. Or if you're building a product with a bunch of features, are you staying true to your roadmap, or are you acquiescing to your biggest customer because they said, we need this now because I made that mistake, right? So I just asked the question. I didn't say, I made the mistake, so you shouldn't make it. I say, if you do this, have you thought about the consequences in the business? Yes, I have. Okay, what are the consequences? Then we talk those through. I'm like, okay, so knowing what you know now, are you going to make this decision in the same way that you were going to make it, 45 minutes ago when we started talking? And just having that conversation, I can do because I have made mistakes in the past, although they're not the same mistakes. They have corollaries to where my clients are today.
Yes. Yeah. Now, Peter, as we wrap up, thinking about your legacy and impact, what hope as a CEO or founder would you hope that they take away from your coaching and the whole human approach in terms of creating a positive and lasting impact on their professional or even personal spheres?
So when I was sick 4 years ago and I had to decide what to do next, I could either start a new company because that's the only thing I know how to do, or I could do this thing. And my objective was to affect as many people as possible to have happier and healthier lives building companies. And so I decided to do this because through my work with individual founder CEOs, I can affect that they have happier, healthier lives in their entrepreneurial journey, but they in turn then affect all the people that they will employ. So I've hired north of 300 people in my different businesses, but already at this point, I've affected more than thousands of people because my clients have large organisms who are now doing things differently because I was involved. So my CEO clients are now impacting their teams differently than if I hadn't been involved. So my legacy, my hope is that when I'm no longer, there's going to be tens of thousands of people around the world who have a better experience building businesses than people like I had because of the input that I've given folks that they've worked with.
Well, Peter, I got to say thank you. Thank you for sharing your invaluable insights on balancing success and well-being. And before we wrap up, do you have any final thoughts or key takeaways you'd like to leave the listeners with?
I think if you're somebody who's out there building a business or thinking about building a business, don't forget yourself. Make sure that you take yourself, the whole human, with you in all aspects of what you do, and not sacrifice elements of who you are just to achieve financial or commercial success.
Very good. And Peter, if our listeners wanted to learn more about you, where could they go to do that?
It's relatively easy. PeterSorgenfrei.com is my website, or if you Google me, there's not a lot of people with my last name, so I'm easy to find.
Wonderful. And I'll leave your website in the description. Listeners, stay tuned for more inspiring conversations for the Prestigious Initiative. Until next time, this is Chris Bean signing off.